Hello everyone, happy to, well, in some way be with you, unfortunately not in person, but on some distance. I hope to make a small contribution to the school. I hope you had a very good week with your lecturers the past, well, almost 2 weeks, and that you learned a lot about sign language linguistics. I thought I could make perhaps a nice contribution by talking a little bit about the newest line of research that we have been basically developing from a longer history of looking at the influence of socio-linguistic settings or social settings on the one hand and sign language structure and use on the other. So I basically would like to give the presentation that we are planning to give next week at the sign language workshop, the African Sign Language Workshop in Nairobi during the WOCAL conference that will be going on. Okay, so we'll be talking about sign language ecologies and also taking into account how things like power imbalances and multilingualism influence sign language forms and how they are used. So this has been an important topic in sign language linguistics basically ever since the early days of sign language research. And a form of power imbalance that was quickly identified was between two varieties that I hope you have already learned about, which is on the one hand the deep sign language or the true sign language, which is the lexicon of the sign language combined with its own grammar, the sign language grammar, on the one hand, and on the other hand the relation between or the kind of hybrid form of signing that we typically refer to as sign-supported speech. So that is basically the lexicon of one language combined with the grammar of another. And weirdly, you might say, the hybrid form of combining the lexicon of a sign language with the grammar of a spoken language was actually the high prestige variety. Whereby, while at the same time, the true sign language, so to say, with its own grammar and its own lexicon, were perceived as low prestige or more fit for informal communication. So that was labeled as a form of diglossia. So basically the coexistence of two languages in a more or less stable way, whereby characterized by this imbalance or inequity in terms of perceived prestige. In the 1980s, this is slightly a different fact, but important for this talk, the World Federation of the Deaf also, and the deaf communities more widely started understanding that actually every country has its own sign language, and it's very important to underline this fact by also creating and advocating for national labels of these sign languages for each sign language to increase visibility and recognition. So this is basically what happened in Western countries, in weird countries, if you will. And as we could see in more recent research by one of your lecturers, Timothy Mac-Hadjah, the situation in Ghana turned out to be a little bit different. Actually, where 3 sign languages coexist. So I'll give you a second to read the slide and then move to the signed variety. Okay. So in Ghana, there are different deaf groups, and we see that there are different types of signing. So firstly, we have something called English, and we have something called broken, and we also have a third variety called local. But that first variety, the high variety with high prestige perhaps, and the local variety we see that with time, the English variety, the variety called English, kind of erased the visibility of the local variety of signing. And the World Federation of the Deaf actually urged the government to also use a label for the national sign language, which was basically labeled for all these three varieties. So in Ghana, we don't see diglossia, but we see triglossia, which is something that we see much more widely in other African countries too, where we can see polyglossia happening in many countries and situations. At the same time, we see that the situation is very different in Guinea-Bissau, whereas deaf education was established in the 50s in Ghana. Guinea-Bissau received its first school for the deaf in 2006, so very recently. And being a former colony of Portugal, the ties with Portugal led to the invitation of two Portuguese linguists, Marta Morgado and Mariana Martins, who also have strong connections to the deaf community in Portugal, and they were invited to work with the deaf community. They also were asked to bring with them Portuguese Sign Language, which they preferred not to do, and they said they prefer to work with the local sign language of the deaf community that was already in use. And they basically developed two sign language dictionaries, and I now see that my video unfortunately covers those dictionaries. But basically what they did, what in the past almost 20 years, what this led to is that the kind of national sign language of Guinea-Bissau is the local sign language with local signs. We also see one small pocket of Portuguese Sign Language, LGP, which is used in one of the schools, a new, recently established school, a little bit further away from the capital. And on top of that, so sorry, I forgot to say that that these sign languages, of course, always exist, are embedded in gestures of the wider hearing community, and we also see home signing happening in various places around these sign languages. Okay, so language ecologies can be, or looking at multilingualism with this perspective of language ecologies can be helpful to understand qualitative social linguistics, and notably the influence of individuals, the influence of populations, and the influence of time and space in shaping these multilingual situations. Of course, if we look at sign languages, we can't just look everywhere. We need to focus on deaf spaces where we actually see signing going on. So such deaf spaces exist in deaf schools where lots of deaf children come together, but also at deaf associations where we see deaf adults and also children, of course, get together, as well as perhaps less formal social gatherings of deaf people and families with multiple deaf members. For spoken languages, we have multiple tools and perspectives and methodologies to understand language use and the social linguistic landscape, if you will. And one of those tools is by looking at the linguistic landscape. So to what extent, if you walk through a street, do you see advertisements in a particular language, or do you see billboards or notes or instructions or whatever? So that can be an interesting way to understand more about how multilingual a place is and how the different languages are put to different uses. If we translate this to deaf spaces, we can talk about signscapes. So where do we see signing visibly present in these deaf spaces other than people using signing? So indeed, in deaf schools, we typically see a lot of visual information, of course, and often this is a mix of spoken language or written language, of course, and also representations of signing. Also on TV, so the presence of sign language interpreters on TV news, for example, also importantly exposes deaf people to particular varieties of signing, right? So with these highly multilingual situations, signscapes can be interesting to understand which varieties are promoted in the kind of public sphere. Is it the sign-supported speech? Is it foreign signing? Is it local signing? Or is there no signing at all and only spoken languages or written languages? So that can be an interesting tool that we will also use and talk about more later. It's good to note that indeed in a lot of African countries we see a kind of footprint or heritage of a particular kind, I would say, the strong influence of American Sign Language. And I think you probably heard about Andrew Foster and his wife Bertha Foster, and this couple actually set up schools in a lot of countries and trained a lot of deaf people to become directors of new schools. And they also got this training in a form of American Sign Language, of basically probably more sign-supported speech, as far as we understand now, even though documentation is a little bit incomplete. More research is needed. And also a lot of initialization, and I think you know what that is. So the use of fingerspelling in a particular signs, and also the use of ASL lexemes. Right. And interestingly, it seems that across West African Sign Languages, we see some recurring American Sign Language signs that are actually not so common in standard US ASL. So they might actually have been introduced by Foster and actually have been maintained and spread through the networks that were created in the training centers of Foster, where new school directors were trained, for example. Okay, so I mentioned these networks already of lecturers or school directors that were trained in Nigeria, Ibadan, and also in Congo. And indeed, this led to a lot of synergy and to people also aiming for standardization, basically, of signing, of ASL-like signing across, for example, French-speaking countries. So Serge Damomo in 1994 developed a dictionary that would be useful for deaf education in French-speaking African countries. So this basically entailed signs that were adapted to French where needed. So for example, the sign for water, which looks like this, water with a W hand shape, would be changed. We get a new hand shape basically the E hand shape of eau in French, which starts with an E. So like this, to mean water. And this was the objective of this variety was clearly transnational. So it was also embraced and adopted by many French-speaking countries, as also documented and studied by Kamei, a researcher from Japan, and Kamei and Sanro from Ivory Coast jointly created follow-up dictionaries for this, what they called langue de signes d'Afrique francophone, so sign language for French-speaking Africa, abbreviated as LSAF, LSAF. Okay, I'll skip the next one and continue here. Okay, I think I also mentioned this slide already, but we basically would like to look at the timing of the introduction of deaf education and the networks of pioneers in deaf education, but also the attitudes towards spoken languages in the larger society and how they basically impacted on signscapes and sign language ecologies. So one of the countries that we have studied in a bit more detail here in the Netherlands and also in Abidjan is Côte d'Ivoire. And basically we see a situation that is quite similar to that in Ghana, with an ASL-based variety being very visible and in front for everyone to see, and a local form of signing that is much more hidden and out of sight. I'll let you read the slide for a second, and then we see Tano, who will present the situation in Côte d'Ivoire in signing. Okay, hello. My name is Tano, like this, and today I will present about the sign language situation in Côte d'Ivoire. So here we have multiple sign varieties. So firstly, we have historically we have ASL that was brought to Côte d'Ivoire by Andrew Foster. So Foster used the sign language in the deaf school. But later, I found that we did have a local signing already going on in Ivory Coast. So the deaf community, they use local signing, and in school they don't. But now, ASL since then has also become added to, and there were local signs added to, and it has developed into a new situation. And so what name should this be given? No decision has been taken yet, so some researchers have given the name LSAF, so the sign language of Francophone Africa, and I have continued to use LSG, Ivorian Sign Language, for the sign languages used locally here. And the deaf community wants to continue using ASL in deaf education, and they say it allows you to travel, for example, and ASL can also help you find work. But it's also important that the local sign language and that the ASL continues. And I would present that the local sign language actually also is very important, and that the deaf community should also continue or keep a connection with local signing. Thank you. Right, and so here we see some images of the visible signing in the school in Côte d'Ivoire. So, for example, the alphabet that is there on a big poster is basically one-on-one directly the same as in American Sign Language. And we also see that there are language materials or dictionaries that are used that are actually from American Sign Language, translated to French, as you see in the picture in the middle. And sorry, my video is also covering the image of the dictionary developed by Sanoro for the signing in French-speaking African countries. In Mali, we see that deaf education started relatively late as well, as compared to Ghana and Ivory Coast, so in the 1990s. And actually, deaf education started with local signing being used, and a dictionary was made, the one on the top. But then deaf Malians started traveling around to neighboring countries, and they were actually mocked for using their own local sign language. And on their return to Bamako, they urged the director of the deaf school to please change to ASL, because that's what all the neighboring countries were doing. So basically, we now see a situation where the older generation is very fluent and strongly users of the local sign language, La Sima, and the younger generations are actually using a local form of ASL. There was also a short-lived introduction of langue de signe française, so French Sign Language, and even langue de signe québécoise, Quebec Sign Language. Because of Mali being a French-speaking country, people thought that it would be good to have a sign language from a French-speaking country, even though you probably know by now that the grammar of these sign languages is very different from that of French. I will skip the point about nucleated networks, and this is basically a summary of what I just said. Then we'll move to Gabon, which is even more complex and even more multilingual than any of the situations we have discussed so far. So I'll give you a second to read the slide. And then have Tatiana Kumbareshi, who is also a PhD student at Leiden, tell us about the situation in Gabon. Hello, good evening. My name is Tatiana. I'm from Gabon. So my research is on Gabon and basically Gabon. And I'm looking at the sign language situation there. So how is it? So in the past, Andrew Foster set up the school, and he brought basically signs from ASL, American Sign Language. And over time, the government said, oh, we'll take over, and they basically replaced the sign language with French Sign Language. So LSF. And then at the same time, there was also a group of interpreters that was being trained by Jehovah's Witness. And what were they trained in? Well, basically in the American Sign Language, but really the US variant of American Sign Language. So not the adapted version to French or to local culture. So the deaf themselves, what were they using? Well, actually we saw that a new sign language was emerging. So from the old sign language, Gabonese sign language developed. That was really Gabonese, so LSG. And that was really a local development out of the old LSF. So now there was a problem because we had, in the school situation, we had on the one hand, the private schools, and on the other hand, the government schools. And the government schools, basically, they were using LSF, so the French sign language was used there with the grammar of French, and that's what they were using. And in the private schools, on the other hand, that was set up and established by deaf directors. Basically, it was the Gabonese sign language that was established and used there. So, yeah, these two sign languages coexist now, and that is, yeah, kind of giving a problem. And as you can see, the situation in Gabon in terms of sign languages is highly multilingual. So basically, that is the situation that we have. Right. And then the deaf community themselves, they really want, what do they really want? Well, basically, they want the Gabonese sign language, so LSG, and they really fight for that, advocate for that. So that's the situation. Thank you. Yeah, so I put up this picture of the chameleon in the sense that sometimes it can be quite confusing and not so easy to understand which label refers to what variety of signing. So we started the presentation with the work of Timothy Mac-Hadjah, who found that actually the label of Ghanaian Sign Language actually entails 3 different forms of signing. And I don't know to what extent you are familiar with the discussion about named languages and translanguaging, where people argue against labeling languages per se. But sign languages actually have also been using the labeling of sign languages, or deaf communities. Deaf communities have been using the tool of labeling to get more recognition and visibility for their sign language. So that is an interesting question that is going on. Well, in brief, we see that the difference in time, so the introduction of signing in an early stage in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, actually led to different situations as compared to perhaps the more recent situations, such as in Guinea-Bissau. And we also see that spoken language ideologies, such as la francophonie, so the centrality of French and belonging to the French-speaking sphere, has also influenced French-speaking countries to adopt sign languages like LSF, French Sign Language, and Quebec Sign Language. And at the same time, we also see that deaf networks of deaf leaders, for example, those trained by Foster, also had a kind of, wide and far ranging effects on, for example, the spread of the LSF, the ASL signs adapted or influenced by French. Okay, that is all I wanted to share today. I thank you very much, and I hope we have time for questions and answers.